Hey, there goes one of those petticoat soldiers now.
Yeah. My sister wants to join the wax. What do you think of that?
She's crazy. What the devil's a woman want to be a soldier for?
Just a waste of time. This is a man's war.
It wasn't just my brother's country, or my husband's country. It was my country as well. And so this wasn't just their war. It was my war, and I needed to serve in it. This quote, shared by Beatrice Hood-Stroop, echoes the feelings of many American women during World War II. The idea of women in the military has been a controversial topic for a very long time. Other countries had begun drafting women to participate in different activities related to the war, but this was not the case for the United States. World War II opened the doors for women to officially serve in the Army. Their brave actions and hard work paved the way to make a major difference in the lives of women in the workforce and military. Prior to World War II, the role of women in society was to take care of the home and family. Women raised the kids and took care of the housework while men worked and earned the money for the family. In the early 1940s, this was the traditional family structure. Many people didn't like the idea of women joining the military. They saw it as women stepping out of their traditional roles. One group that strongly opposed the idea was the Catholic Church. They thought it was a serious menace to the home and foundation of a true Christian. They were concerned about submitting innocent girls to the temptations of the army. Many men worried that if women joined the military, their household status would change. The army itself believed that women would be a distraction to military men. The attack on Pearl Harbor on Sunday, December 7th, 1941 changed everything.
On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
President Roosevelt declared that the U.S. will be entering World War II. Before the war, factory jobs that involved physical labor were done by men. To prepare for the war, factories had been converted from producing normal household goods to manufacturing equipment necessary for the war efforts, such as planes, ships, and ammunitions. When America entered World War II, a great number of men joined the military, resulting in a shortage of labor to do the jobs that required physical labor. A compromise had to be reached. It was a forced one. The companies had two choices: go out of business or start hiring women. Closing down was not an option, so they started hiring women. This opened the doors for women to enter the workforce and change their role in society.
They contributed everything. Back home, they worked in the factories. They did a lot of things.
During World War II, the government created a campaign aimed at recruiting female workers for factory jobs. Rosie the Riveter was the star of the campaign. She became the iconic image of a working woman during that time.
All the day long, where the rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie, the Riveter.
To reassure women that the demands of the war would not make them too masculine, factories provided female employees lessons on how to apply makeup. Cosmetics were never rationed during the war. Keeping American women looking their best was believed to be important for morale and maintaining social norms. This propaganda campaign resulted in more than 6 million women joining the workforce. Between 1940 and 1945, the female demographic of the national workforce increased from 27% to 37%. During this time, America saw some of its highest production rates in history. As America moved closer to entering a Second World War, Representative Edith Nourse Rogers from Massachusetts realized that women could play a direct role in the war efforts. In May of 1941, she introduced a bill for the creation of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. This major compromise was made to address the conflict of women joining the military. She felt strongly that women could play a vital role in the war. She was determined that if women were to serve again with the army in a wartime, they would receive the same legal protection and benefits as their male counterparts. When the WAC bill was first introduced by Rogers in May of 1941, many people opposed it and it wasn't passed. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the authorities realized that in order to win the war, they needed women to be a part of the military. Rogers reintroduced the WAC bill in the end of December 1941. This time, it was approved with full support. Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, known as WAC, was a group formed according to Public Law 554 for the purpose of making available to the national defense the knowledge, skill, and special training of the women of the nation. After President Roosevelt signed the Compromise Bill into law on May 15, 1942, over 13,000 women applied for the first 440 officer slots. On July 15, 1942, the initial WAC officer class started an 8-week program at Fort Des Moines, Iowa. The compromise of recruiting women resulted in more than 350,000 women serving in the United States Armed Forces during World War II. The impact of the WAC compromise was so great on the war effort that in 1943, General Marshall decided to remove the auxiliary label, asking Congress to give the women full military status.
My branch of service was in the Army Air Force World War II. It made my outlook a lot broader on worldly affairs.
Apart from the WAC, women represented themselves in the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, known as WASPs. Women also worked as volunteers in the Navy in a group known as WAVES, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Services.
Priscilla Getchell. I was a Navy chief when I came out.
They also served in the Marines and in a branch of the Coast Guard known as the SPARS.
Florence Pignoni, and I was in the U.S. Navy Waves, and I got to be Specialist Q First Class, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Women received awards such as Purple Hearts, the Bronze Star, and Legions of Merit. Some were prisoners of war, and some died in the service of their country. Authorities worried that when men returned from military service, there would be no jobs available for them, and admonished women to return to their rightful place in the home as soon as victory was at hand.
And then they planned to get rid of us the minute war was over. And that is true. They were just sending us home.
Although as many as 75% of women reported that they wanted to continue their jobs after World War II, women were laid off in large numbers at the end of the war. But women's participation in the workforce bounced back relatively quickly. Despite the stereotype of the 1950s housewife, by 1950, about 32% of women were working outside the home. World War II had solidified the notion that women were in the workforce to stay. The history of women who served in the U.S. military during World War II is a complex story of policy development, breaking social norms, and resolving conflict through compromise. The war changed women's role in society and led to greater gender equality. These women are the mothers of women who led the feminist movement in the 1970s and the grandmothers of today's activists. On December 3, 2015, women across the military celebrated the news that they can now fight in wars alongside their male counterparts as equals. Many years since World War II, the compromise made to include women in the military through the creation of the WAC has been worth it. Currently, 212,000 women serve on active duty in the United States military, comprising of 15% of the armed forces in comparison to the 2% in 1950. Based on the Department of Education statistics, in 2017, 59% of college enrollees were female, compared to the 29% in the 1950s. Women still trail men in professional subcategories such as business, science, and engineering, but compared to the 1940s, currently, women hold top positions in male-dominated occupations such as doctors, lawyers, politicians, engineers, and CEOs. Throughout these years, women overcame conflict, performed the same duties as men, and paved the way for future women to do great things. They showed the world loud and clear that it was their war too.